fired? Are you sure? Okay. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It takes place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2. This happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3. I am not a native English speaker, and professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullshit kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on, as was required by his employer. He had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for. But anyway, during his many years with this employer, by all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. In Italy, everyone was promised that things would remain the same. But with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers, and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was in actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Quote, they all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" Quote, he was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing. claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols. And the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation intending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time. Within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available, he was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business, now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at and replied with something like, "I am sorry. You must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them, at 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs. Of course, after a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months paid damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin, And what are you going to do? Fire me? After that? Edit. Spelling corrections. This is beautiful. I'm not sure of my favorite part. The pre-prepared cease and desist letters on the patents he owned. The consulting fee being 6 times his regular pay. Or the 24-month severance package. Actually, I know my favorite part. That those asshole managers still had to go clap and cheer every morning because they don't know how to do anything else while they were hemorrhaging money. Just glorious. I know people like this as my father was an engineer before he retired, and he's exactly like this person's father, and would have done the same in the situation below. To the extent I can actually picture the cringe happening. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. Really happy he got his revenge. Plus higher pay. Plus bonuses denied. Plus asshole tax. Good for him. I hate when companies make you fake enthusiasm with clapping and such. So he was making triple the money for half the work, kept his side business, and screwed over his enemies in perpetuity by fucking with their bonuses. All while being completely untouchable for all practical purposes. That magnificent bastard. I salute him. I hate company feel-good team building bullshit. I'm there to do my job and get paid. I don't mind chatting with my coworkers and being sociable, but being expected to participate in the forced happy times bothers me. At a previous job, my director liked to do stuff in the evening so most of the staff could attend. I worked 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. and lived 20 miles from the office across the bridge. They'd want to do team building at 5 p.m. and I'd never go. Boss was not happy and wanted to know why, so I told her I wasn't going to drive home, drive back, and have to pay for the bridge. I also told her I wasn't going to stay there and sit in my cube for 3 hours. I'd go home to spend time with my family and do my personal stuff. I'd already spent 8 hours with my coworkers. You should also post this in our asshole tax. Engineers always do the best. ProRevenge. Big companies fuck over their employees like this all the time. So it's nice to see the occasional example of someone turning the tables and showing corporate how much it sucks to be screwed over. This is what happens when international companies think that their home country rules apply everywhere. I worked in Australia for a US-based organization that said you can't take sick days for the first 3 months, or something like that. At that time in Australia, in that industry, you were awarded your full entitlement of sick leave the day you started as a permanent employee, subject to being required to provide appropriate evidence of illness from a medical practitioner. I had to have my gallbladder out 2 months after starting. One of the American managers tried to make a thing of it, but was shot down very quickly by the Australian manager. American here. Our corporate culture is shit. Thanks for sharing this story. Great job. Extra credit and praise for using the word apart correctly. Most native English speakers in the United States under 40 years old cannot do this. Bravo, friend. Mandatory cheering from a grumpy old man. Yay. Woo. Oh, boy. I'm so gung-ho. Check out my gung-ho. On fire. Baby. I'm so happy. I almost dropped my dentures in the sawdust. This is exactly how a union is supposed to work. Beautiful. One of the only ways to prevent narcissism and assholery in the office. That was glorious. Seriously, don't try and screw over an experienced engineer, or any seasoned professional, for that matter. They can, and often will, use that expertise to clap back in ways you couldn't predict. Funny how management never take the hint of, "Are you sure? Do you want to do this?" Hashtag crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of the women. What is this clapping and cheering thing? Is this American? I've never heard of it. The only times I could see it being a thing is in sales where people are making and closing deals that could make them a lot of money, i.e. scenes from Wolf of Wall Street, or occasional celebrations like the retiring of a long-time employee. Applause. Op. Your friend's father is my new hero. This is freaking awesome. Wipes a tear from my eye. This really is beautiful in so many ways. Living in the US, I am well aware of at will, and it sucks. I have spent the last 13, give or take, years working remotely for various companies, and the best company I ever worked for was a European company. The best part was before being hired. In some things we were able to negotiate with them, asking, "So do you want to follow US law or EU law?" And then they let me choose. In most cases, I chose the EU law for what we would follow. I had my fair share of useless meetings, weekly and daily meetings for no special reason or that could be summarized in few lines of an email. But I am not familiar on the clapping and cheering thing described here. Could someone explain that? Does it have a name?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.